All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the second installment of our Summer Professional Development Series. Today, we are so honored to have Dr. Daphne Watkins joining us to lead a session on mixed methods research. I'm going to start with a super brief introduction to share some more about her background and expertise, and then I will pass it to Dr. Watkins to get us started. So Dr. Daphne Watkins is the Letha A. Shadida Collegiate Professor of Social Work and a University Diversity and Social Transformation Professor at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. After noticing the need for postgraduate research methods training, Professor Watkins developed the first certificate program in mixed methods research at the University of Michigan School of Social Work in 2013. This global certificate program, designed for scholars interested in conducting mixed methods research in practice settings, has had over 500 participants worldwide and served as a motivation behind her first book, Mixed Methods Research, with Deborah Giowa, 2015, Oxford University Press, for the Pocket Guides to Social Work Research Methods series. Professor Watkins is particularly interested in using secondary data in mixed methods research and published the award-winning Secondary Data in Mixed Methods Research 2022 SAGE publications as part of the SAGE Mixed Methods Research series. In addition to developing culturally appropriate strategies for conducting mixed methods research, Professor Watkins is also interested in individual and team-based approaches to organizing, coding, and analyzing qualitative data quickly and rigorously. So she developed the rigorous and accelerated data reduction radar technique and published a paper outlining the steps in 2017, which has over 700 citations worldwide. Professor Watkins is the founding director of the Gender and Health Research Lab and the award-winning Young Black Men, Masculinities, and Mental Health Project, which leverages technology to provide mental health education and social support for young Black men. She teaches master's and doctoral courses on research methods, program evaluation, and leadership and management at the University of Michigan. She also teaches various methods workshops for INSTATs and has taught at the University of Essex Summer School in Social Science Data Analysis in London, England. So thank you so very much, Dr. Watkins, for joining us. We'll give you a warm welcome. I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bentley. I have to say, you would think after 20 years in the academy that I will get accustomed to hearing about myself in person, in public, and I'm still not accustomed to it. But thank you so much. I really appreciate the warm welcome. And hello, everyone. It is sunny. It's sunny here in Ann Arbor. I don't know if it's sunny where you are, but it's also hot here in Ann Arbor. And so hopefully I can, continue with that theme and bring some heat to you all this afternoon, and we can talk about mixed methods research. Now, before I share my slides, one thing I wanted to just kind of check in about is I like to sort of know who is who in the zoo, as my colleagues in Australia say, and I'm curious to know about who is in the room. Can I just get a show of hands of folks who have ever done a mixed methods project before? Anybody? Okay. Oh, most of you. Okay. Okay. So I'm happy to tailor and target on the spot if need be, but my slides are pretty much a mixed methods primer. And I often tell people that you've probably know a little bit about mixed methods, but I think the way that I talk about it is in a different way than how you may have been taught. And so I want to sort of present that first and foremost to give you a sense for the different angle and the different vantage point that I might take. I am going to talk about the designs as well, but I feel like from what I remember in terms of the invitation, this is a bit of a workshop. So feel free to jump in, ask questions, let me know, hey, Dr. Watkins, like we already know that, you can keep going or you can skip over that. But I want this to be as informal as possible because it's July and I'm not really trying to do any serious work in July, right? We're all trying to hang out and have some fun. So as far as I'm concerned, we're all in my living room right now with a glass of wine and we are talking about mixed methods research. How does that sound? Good? Excellent, excellent. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen. I might need someone to turn on the ability to let me share. So I just sent a little request there. Oh, I think that works. Okay, great. Yep, I think you have now given me the ability. Let me see if I can get this on and popping. All right. Hopefully you all can see that. Yes, thank you. And since Dr. Bentley provided an introduction for me, I hid those slides while you were talking, Brandy, so that now I don't have to give my own introduction. I'll just kind of keep things moving. So, really excited to join you all today. I've heard so many amazing things about this group, and I have been following you all on social media for some time now. I'm wildly impressed with the dedication and the passion with which you all do your work. I, as you may know, have been doing work with and in service of Black men and boys for 20 years. And so anytime I can get together with other esteemed scholars and talk about men's health, fathers' health, and how we can help build up and support our community members, I'm all for that. But today we'll talk about mixed methods research, and maybe we'll weave in some of our own personal stories and some of our own personal research topics as we go into this. And so Dr. Bentley already gave a shout out to a couple of books that I've published, but I wanted to actually give some images as well, because if I didn't, my editor would be very upset with me. So I'm going to just do this quick little slide so you can see that in 2015, I published with Deborah Joya a quick little pocket guide on mixed methods research. It's an easy read. I'll talk about it in terms of the steps that you can take to conduct mixed methods research. And then in 2022, I tell people that I birthed my third child in this secondary data and mixed methods book because it took me 5 years to write this book. And it was probably one of the more difficult things I've ever done in creating science around how to incorporate secondary data into either one or both of the phases for your mixed methods project. So that book is there as well. Pick it up if you're interested in building in some secondary data sources, okay? So now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the meat and potatoes. So again, what you think you may know about mixed methods research, I'm really hoping to build on that today. And no matter where you are, if you are a seasoned full professor or you are an undergraduate student, I always start at the same place when I talk about mixed methods research, and I talk about it from a social science perspective. So this is something that I'm sure we all know about. We can all teach each other about it. I think we're incredibly proficient around what does the research process look like? What does the cycle of research look like? So we know that we identify problems, we define that problem in terms of a question that has the capacity for study. We develop a plan to answer that question. We gather data according to prescribed practices in our various disciplines, be it social work or public health or sociology or education. We draw conclusions from those data, but we all know that even after we've answered a question, we typically have more questions, right? We rarely do the kind of research where we have come up with the end all be all answer to all questions and it's time to erect a statue of us, right? I don't think any of us are in that business. But the beautiful thing about research, what I love about research, is I typically start with questions and I end with more questions that I can continue to explore. So I want you to keep this sort of cyclical process of research in mind as we go through the next few slides. Now, my favorite thing to talk about, and if you've ever taken a mixed methods workshop from me or have participated in my certificate or have heard me speak anywhere, I am always singing praises around the knowledge level continuum. Because as a research methods professor, as someone who's written books, I feel like I didn't understand mixed methods until I learned the knowledge level continuum. And so we're going to start here. And my hope is that your understanding of mixed methods will be a little bit deeper after we talk about this. So let me know what your reactions are as we get closer to the end of this piece. So if you haven't heard about the knowledge level continuum, I want to give you a sense for what it is. So, and hopefully you all cannot hear this lawnmower that's outside my window. Let me know if it gets too loud, okay? Can anyone hear it? I'm just curious before I continue. Okay, thank you, Kelly. I was looking for a nod or a head shake. Okay. So first and foremost, the knowledge level continuum. The knowledge level continuum is really the origin for where all research should come from. A lot of people don't know this, but the knowledge level continuum, it pretty much tells us that we should choose a research method based on the amount of pre-existing knowledge on a topic or pre-existing data on a topic. And essentially, in the knowledge level continuum, there are three different levels. There's this sort of qualitative level where we do more exploratory questions. There's a quantitative/qualitative level where we have more descriptive questions. And then there's a quantitative level where we have more explanatory questions. I'm sure these are all words that you're familiar with, but I want to talk a little bit more about how the amount of pre-existing information about your topic is really supposed to dictate the kind of question that you ask and the kind of method that you use. Now, the reason why this is important is because I'm sure all of you are just like me, in that when I was getting trained in my PhD program, I learned whatever method my advisor wanted me to learn. And he learned whatever method his advisor wanted him to learn, and so on and so forth. And so we're all essentially like the legacy of our advisors, right? Like some people call it the children and the grandchildren of our advisors. And so if my advisor is a statistician, you better be certain that I am learning statistics, whether I want to or not. If my advisor is an ethnographer, then I'm learning more about the depth of stories and the richness of context. Now, while that's great in theory and practice, that's really not how we should be approaching research. What the knowledge level continuum teaches us is that if you have an interest in a topic, you are supposed to go and seek as much information as possible on that topic. And based on what you find, then you enter into inquiry about that topic. So let me say a little bit more about what this looks like. So let's start with the first level, the exploratory research studies level. The knowledge level continuum tells us that if you are searching for a topic and you're searching for information or doing a lit review, if you will, on that topic, if there is relatively nothing or little that exists on that topic, then just by virtue of that, you have to do an exploratory study. And by exploratory study, of course, you're probably thinking about qualitative research. Okay. And so with qualitative research, we already know that this is very sort of much the first step in a research process. And if you think about it more practically, if there's not a lot of papers published on your topic, or there are no book chapters or data sets available, a qualitative study makes sense because you essentially have to build language for your topic, right? If there's no previous literature, how do you know what questions to ask? And so it makes sense to me that if I Google, what are the experiences like for dog owners in the Bay Area of California who are artists and also have carpal tunnel syndrome, right? I'm thinking about the most random question I could possibly think of. But if that is my area of interest and nothing exists, then naturally, I probably shouldn't start with a quantitative study because I don't yet have language to actually ask the questions that I want to study. And so that's what the knowledge level continuum does. It tells us that when we want to become familiar with basic facts, people, and concerns, when we want to develop a well-grounded mental picture of what is happening in an area, or when we want to generate ideas and develop tentative theories, determine the feasibility of doing additional studies, formulate some of those initial questions, and develop techniques and a sense of direction, the knowledge level continuum says, come on, folks, you have to start with an exploratory research study, and that, by definition, is qualitative, okay? So this is what it looks like if you're really entering into your research program or your agenda, really guided by what currently exists or what doesn't exist. Now, the next level is, okay, let's say you're Googling your topic, you're in Google Scholar, you're in PsycInfo, whatever your preferred database is. And there's a little bit of work done in your area, maybe a few preliminary studies from back in the 90s, or maybe a study here or there. What the knowledge level continuum tells us is that we should actually do descriptive studies because we have some information about a topic, but not a whole lot, right? So we can build on that previous information by maybe providing an accurate profile of a group. Maybe there's some preliminary work that was done 15 years ago, but we're at a stage now where we need to describe a process, a mechanism or relationships, maybe give some sense of a verbal or numerical picture, find information to stimulate new explanations. Maybe we need to create a set of categories or classification types, or maybe the work that was done is a little bit outdated or maybe it's not culturally sensitive. And so instead, we want to clarify sequence or set of stages within our particular group of focus, right? And descriptive studies can also help us document information. And so I've already talked about exploratory studies. Now, that's what you do if there's virtually nothing that exists, little to nothing, let's say that. But if there is something that exists in your topic, but maybe not a whole lot, that's when you go for the descriptive research study. Now, the nice thing about a descriptive research study is you could actually do qualitative or quantitative studies here. Because depending on what currently exists, you might need to do one, you might need to do both. And so, what I like to say is descriptive research is really where qualitative and quantitative methods meet, right? Because you can provide a description of the population, and we know that with descriptive studies, there is no causal relationships. It's really just giving us the who, what, when, where, and how, but we don't know what causes it. And so some people might argue maybe we can pose some qualitative questions, maybe we can do some focus groups even to get a sense for what's happening in this topic with these people. And then, of course, if you wanted to run a quick quantitative survey out there, maybe do a Qualtrics survey, you could also provide the number of times something occurs. And of course, this lends itself to some of those preliminary descriptive statistics that we've talked about or that people have talked about in research classes. So I think you know where I'm going next. Okay, so again, the knowledge level continuum, despite what your research professors have said, despite what NIH reviewers say, we actually are supposed to enter into the research process basing our methods on what currently exists in our topic area. We don't always do that. I know I haven't always done that, right? But I do feel like this is essentially how we're supposed to be conducting ourselves as scientists. So we've talked about exploratory research questions, we've talked about descriptive. The last one is explanatory research studies. So as you can imagine, this is when you have a topic that has a nice, robust amount of information that exists. My go-to example for this is cancer research. So for those of us who do work on cancer, I'm not saying that everything has been uncovered, that we know everything there is to know about cancer. But I'm simply saying there's a lot that has been done. And so maybe instead of trying to build language in a topic, we're actually trying to determine some causal relationships between variables, maybe understand the nature of the relationship between those variables and provide some evidence to support or refute a hypothesis. Okay. And so I mention this again because I really think it's important to understand the foundation of mixed methods. And in many ways, my argument is I think if we know the way we want to enter into inquiry around a topic, we kind of need to know what currently exists, right? That's always the first step in any research project. I'm sure you all have done tons of lit reviews, just like me. But sometimes we use those lit reviews and write a literature review, but then still choose a method that we're more comfortable with, not with the method that we probably need to use based on what currently exists. Okay, so that is the foundation. I'm going to pause for reaction, questions, comments, and then I'm happy to jump into some mixed methods foundational pieces here. Any reactions to my knowledge level continuum? Have folks heard about the knowledge level continuum before? Okay, yeah. All right, I see a couple of nods, not so much. I feel like I always shake the ground that people walk on when I present it. I'm like, listen, I know we were all supposed to learn this, but apparently they're not teaching this anymore. So I don't know why that is the case. But I do think it's really important, especially if you're thinking about truly doing some groundbreaking work that uses mixed methods. I think it's very important to think about the knowledge level continuum. Thank you so much, Jewel. I appreciate your honesty and transparency. Okay. Any questions, comments, or reactions?
I've never heard of the continuum before, but I think it's intriguing and I definitely want to learn more about it and share this information with people that are in my cohort because we haven't even taken a class on mixed methods. Like we've taken a qual and a quant class individually, but not a mixed methods. So I'm planning on doing mixed methods for my dissertation, and I'm having to teach myself. Like I'm just reading a lot of textbooks and articles, trying to get a handle on it.
Oh, good. I'm so glad you're here, Kelly. This is going to be great. Okay. I'm really glad that you shared that too, because it helps me figure out how to frame this presentation that's going to be most helpful for you. We don't want you to go it alone. So we want you to feel like you have support. So I'm really happy to, even after this workshop, continue the conversation if it's helpful. All right. Okay, so good. So let me go ahead and move into mixed methods research, which is why you all are here today. Okay, so if you were to go into Google and Google what is mixed methods or what are mixed methods, dozens of definitions will pop up. Okay, my favorite happens to be one from 2008 from John Cresswell, where he says mixed methods research is a methodology for conducting research that involves collecting, analyzing, and integrating or mixing quantitative and qualitative research and data in a single study or longitudinal program of inquiry. And I've highlighted a few words here because every time I read this definition, I just feel like I get goosebumps because this feels like the all-encompassing definition of mixed methods research for several reasons. A lot of people think if I don't collect and analyze qualitative and quantitative data in the same study today, I am not a mixed methods researcher. And I feel like that could not be further from the truth. For many of us, mixed methods happens over the course of our careers. So yes, we may conduct a single method quantitative study that produces coefficients and output and quantitative data. And then maybe I do that for my dissertation, but then when I get into my postdoc, I use what I learned quantitatively to inspire qualitative methods. Maybe I want to use those statistics to maybe do some focus groups and get those people to confirm what I learned quantitatively. Maybe I want to talk with people to see, are we accurately capturing their experiences quantitatively and have them tell me that qualitatively? And so I want to just go on record and dispel a myth because a lot of people say, I plan to do a mixed methods dissertation. I'm going to collect both data sources, and they present that to their dissertation committee. And just solely based on the committee's abilities and comfort level, they may say, no, you can't do that. Like, I know you want to do mixed methods, but we as a committee can't help you with that. We can't support you in that. So we would advise you to do a qualitative study or a quantitative study. And I get a lot of doctoral students who reach out to me very sad because they say, now I'm not a mixed methods researcher anymore. And I say, no, pick that head up and smile because you are still a mixed methods researcher. But for those of us who've been doing mixed methods for 20 years, my studies are not all mixed methods in the same day. Sometimes I do a qualitative study, a quantitative study, a mixed method study, a mixed method study, So my program of research is mixed methods, and yours can be too. And that's what I like about this definition. I feel like this definition allows us to not feel the pressure of if we don't collect both data sources today, then somehow we're not mixed methods researchers. If your methods build on one another over your program of research, if they inspire the next step or stage, if you're seeing gaps from one method that's being filled by the second method, guess what? You're a mixed methods researcher. Okay, so just lean into that with me. Okay, now the purpose of mixed methods research is that both qualitative and quantitative research in combination provide a better understanding of a research problem or issue than either research approach alone. So mixed methods really is about trying to fill the obvious gaps that one method provides, right? We know that when it comes to quantitative methods, we get a lot of breadth, but not so much depth. And we know with qualitative methods, we get a lot of depth, but not breadth. And so bringing them together, we have both breadth and depth. And that's a beautiful thing because the strengths of one really offsets the weaknesses of the other. Okay, and again, this can happen in a single study, like a mixed methods project or an NIHK award, or it can happen in a grant application, or it can happen over the course of your postdoc experience or your tenure track position. Okay, so lean into the fact that your mixed methods work may happen over time. The other thing I want to note here is that there has been an evolution of mixed methods over, I say, the past 30 years. I always like to point out the names because oftentimes people tell me, oh, I went and searched in EBSCOhost or PsycInfo for mixed method study and I couldn't find any. And I have to say, hold on one second, wait. Because sometimes when you put mixed methods in a search engine, you may be limiting yourself or you may be sort of having too tight of a parameter around studies that actually are mixed methods. Some people call mixed method study multi-method studies or triangulation studies. I've seen integrated, combined. Even my dissertation 20 years ago, the title of it was A Quantitative and Qualitative Study of blah, 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 because 20 years ago, I actually didn't know mixed methods was a thing. So my dissertation was very literal. Like, this is a quantitative and qualitative study of whatever I'm studying. So some people do that. Some people call this multi-methodology or mixed methodology or mixed method without the S and a hyphen or mixed research. But now more and more I'm seeing mixed methods. Okay, so I just want to point this out again because if you're just thinking that mixed methods is going to capture everything you're looking for in a lit review, it may not. So you might want to play around with some terms in your area of interest to see what else may pop up when you're doing lit reviews in your area of expertise. Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing some of the comments in the chat. Yes, so I am here to dispel all myths, Kelly. So I embrace it and you should too. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's talk about the core characteristics of mixed methods research. So I'm going to define for you what a mixed method study is all about, because some people may tell you otherwise, and I want you to hear it from me what it is. So in mixed methods, the researcher collects and analyzes both qualitative and quantitative data, mixes the two forms of data, gives priority to one or both forms of data, and then uses these procedures in a single study or in multiple phases of a study. Now, the reason why I highlight this is because I'm at the University of Michigan, and many of you have probably heard of the Institute for Social Research, or ISR, and it's a very prestigious social science institute that's been around for much longer than I've been around. And I've collaborated with colleagues from there for many, many years who are much older than me, probably old enough to be my parents, respectfully. And they tell me, oh, Daphne, I've been doing mixed methods for years. Oh, yeah. Every year we send out a quantitative survey and we have a few open-ended questions at the end. So, yes, I know you're supposed to be the expert on mixed methods, Daphne, but I've been doing it for years. And so what do you think my question to them is after they tell me that? I ask, well, do you ever integrate the open-ended survey responses with what you're learning from the survey? Oh, no, we don't do that. I say, well, I'm sorry, but you're not doing mixed methods. Mixed methods doesn't happen until you bring the two together. At that point, you're just collecting multiple sources of data, which is fine. That's great. Do that if it's necessary. It's just not mixed methods yet. It does not become mixed methods until you mix the data sources. And so they love it when I tell them that. No, actually, they hate it when I tell them that, but it is the truth. Okay. Yes, Rachel, question.
Hi. So I'm no longer in academia. Once I finished grad school, I went into a non-academic policy research position. And during my onboarding, I read a report that they had put out that was, supposed to be mixed methods, and discovered that I guess technically it was, but what they had done was used like two different samples. So they collected quantitative data from one sample, and then they collected qualitative data from a separate sample.
Okay.
And then they sort of were combining and integrating the two into one report.
Okay.
And so I pointed that out as a potential issue because I think they were trying to compare them as if it was apples to apples. And so I just wondered, is the underlying assumption here in terms of the core characteristics that you're collecting and analyzing qualitative and quantitative data from the same sample of people?
No,
Okay.
it is not. Believe it or not, a lot of mixed method studies are done with two different samples.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what I typically advise people to do is if you are collecting data from two different samples, that's actually really common because a lot of our surveys are anonymous, right? We're putting surveys out there. We want people to answer them. And sometimes we can't get those people or get to those people to do qualitative data collection. What I typically advise, Rachel, is try to match up the demographics as best you can. So if you know the demographics of the people who completed the survey, try to seek and recruit people who match those demographics: race, gender, age, income level, marital status, whatever the case may be. But then, of course, report that. You can say in your report, not that this is necessarily a limitation, because depending on the nature of your study, it may not be, but you can say, our quantitative sample came from this, and then we use that to choose participants for our qualitative sample. We use the demographics that we learned from our quant sample, but it actually is not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of people do that, and it is by definition mixed methods research.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Great question. Okay.
Dr. Watkins, are you going
yes.
to, I don't want to jump the gun with what you're presenting. Are you going to talk and explain what you mean by mixing both of the types of data? Because right now I'm like on the edge of my seat. Like I'm like, my dissertation, I think is, I'm collecting two sources, two different streams of data. Now I'm like, how do I integrate?
What happens?
What does it look like to bring those two? I want to make sure that I'm doing it because
Okay.
I am hoping that what I am doing is going to be mixed methods. And so, yes.
So I have a teaser slide in here, Kelly, but I don't think we'll have a lot of time to get into it today. But I do have a teaser in here to kind of clue you into what it could look like. But thank you for that. I also have other opportunities if you all would love to learn about mixed methods. Actually, next week, I'm teaching a week-long Mixed Methods Essential course where, Kelly, I get into that in excruciating detail, how to do the mixing. And I actually have a flyer at the end of my slide deck. It's not too late to register if you want to register. But I get into a lot more detail next week, but I don't in this hour-long session. But I do provide a teaser. So let's see if we can get to that. And then at least in our time together today, maybe I can go through a few different things and then we can do some question and answer. We can just open it up and have a conversation, because I would love to be able to provide some practical advice and assistance for what you all are working on right now. Okay. So I can kind of skate over some of this stuff. I think you all probably know some of the challenges of skills, time and resources, and convincing others. A lot of us, as I mentioned earlier, are trained in one method, not so much in the other. And so doing the work, reading the books, talking to people, getting advice is really what I recommend if you feel more proficient in one method compared to the other. Some people say mixed methods takes longer than a single method study, and I could probably debate that, because I think it really depends on the nature of the study. But don't let someone tell you that they're not interested in supporting your mixed methods work, or you shouldn't do it because it's going to take longer. I can absolutely argue that down in the court of law. So I feel like that shouldn't be a reason why you don't do it. Convincing others could be tough. And so I always recommend, getting your armor on and providing people who are naysayers or not supportive of some exemplar studies that are mixed methods research, talk about how specifically you need it to answer your research question. Okay, and that usually can sell the point better. So I'm going to talk just very quickly about the differences between the two methods. And then I'm going to talk about some of the designs, and maybe this will help us frame our next part of the discussion, because I'm going to keep my eye on the clock here, because I think we only have a few more minutes left. But I imagine that like you all, or like me, many of you were trained in one area versus the other, right? Some of us were trained to be statisticians, to count things, have large samples, know exactly what you want to find, use statistics, Generalizability is the most important thing. Have some distance between you and your respondents, be objective. And we know statistics is very established and more associated with the traditional scholarship. On the qualitative side, I do also know I have some more qualitatively oriented folks here. We're all about context, right? Stories, small samples, being in depth, not necessarily knowing what we want to find, but discovering it, being happy to learn about what emerges along the way. We really value words. We want to hear people's explanations and their descriptors and things like that. We want to find meaning and we want to be involved in what we learn. We also know that qualitative research tends to be very subjective. And I feel like only recently have we really, really respected the science of qualitative research. So a lot of people argue this is more associated with the modern scholarship. Because I know I have some students on the line, I'm going to just use this quick opportunity to take a 30-minute soapbox break and say, one of the things I typically advise my doctoral students, my postdocs in particular, is and I'm being recorded, so I should dance along this gingerly. But I tend to prefer that people not say, I'm a quantitative researcher or I'm a qualitative researcher. Oh, I feel like this is a little break in my heart every time someone says that. Let me tell you why. Because you all are studying a topic that is so necessary in our culture, in our world. And I would like to think that in order to study this topic to help out Black fathers, to help out Black families, you will learn whatever method you need to learn. Okay? I don't think you should limit yourself. I think it's okay to say, well, I'm more qualitatively oriented or I'm more quantitatively oriented based on how I was trained. But I don't ever want to think of someone as limiting themselves. I'm a qualitative researcher. No, you're not. You will do whatever you need to do to help out Black families, to help out people of color, to make sure children have their fathers in the home, to make sure wives have their husbands. I don't believe for a second that you will limit yourself in that way. That was literally my story. I tell people all the time, when I was a doctoral student, I had a statistics phobia. I was terrified of statistics. And I started studying Black men's mental health, and I started thinking about my father, my brother, my uncles, and guess what? I said, I'm not going to let this stop me from doing this work that I need to do for my community. Fire up the statistics. Let me figure out what I got to do. And so my vantage point, my perspective changed completely when I realized it's not about me, it's about them. And when it's about them, you will do whatever you need to do to get that research question answered. So that's my 30-second soapbox. But I'm not looking at qualitative researchers or quantitative researchers on this line. I'm looking at qualitatively oriented people because I get you have a preference and a comfort level, but you will run a structural equation model if you need to. That's what I believe, okay? You will do an ethnography if you need to, and you have support for that, okay? I hope you all receive that with love. So I think we have enough time for me to quickly go through the core mixed methods designs and maybe some advanced designs. And then I'm going to open it up because I think, again, remember, we're in my living room having wine, talking about mixed methods. So we got to leave some time for that. We have to leave some time to refill some glasses and have some conversations about what you all are working on. I want to remind you, though, before we start talking about the core mixed methods designs and the advanced designs, this is our foundation. Whatever you are studying, it is guided by what currently exists on your topic. What do we know already? Where are the gaps? Do we have language? If not, we need to do exploratory questions with qualitative studies. Do we have a little bit, but maybe not so much in our topic? Maybe we need to ask more descriptive questions. Do we have a lot of information on our topic? Okay, let's go the quantitative study route. But whatever you decide, it will be guided by what exists or what doesn't exist in your topic. The other thing that I want to note is I published a chapter a couple of years ago with one of my former doctoral students, Natasha Johnson, who is an assistant professor at Columbia now, and we mapped the knowledge level continuum onto mixed methods designs, just to further argue this point about how we can advance education research through mixed methods with secondary data. So I'm happy to share a copy of that if that is of interest to folks. But first, let's talk about core designs, okay? So if you are new to mixed methods, you might not know this, But there are only 3 core designs to mixed methods research. There's only the convergent design, the explanatory sequential design, and the exploratory sequential design. Everything beyond that is an advanced design or a complex design, and they all build on one of these 3. So I'm going to go through these quickly. And again, I want to make sure we give ourselves some time at the end. So you may already know this, but for those who are still kind of new to mixed methods, the convergent design is the design that a lot of people who are new to mixed methods go with because it seems a little bit user-friendly and that you can pretty much keep the 2 methods separate for the most part until you get to the analysis phase of the work, and then you bring the methods together. Okay, so it's really great if you're new to this. You don't have to set up any sequential analysis and things like that. It's really like, hey, I can do a separate qualitative study, a separate quantitative study, analyze those data sources, and then integrate when I get to the end. So it's very straightforward in that regard. The explanatory sequential design, they get back to the knowledge level continuum, right? Explanatory questions are quantitative questions. And so as you can imagine, the explanatory sequential design starts with a quantitative method, goes through it from beginning to end, and then you follow up with a qualitative method that is inspired by the quantitative method. A lot of people ask me, how do I know if I should do a convergent design or one of the sequential designs? This is my answer. If one of the methods and what you do for one of the methods is contingent upon decisions you make for the first method, you need a sequential design. Okay? If you're going through your quantitative data collection and your analysis, and you're like, okay, now I'm ready to do my qualitative study, but I can't do my focus group protocol until we run the statistics, or I don't know who I want to sample qualitatively until we complete the quantitative method, that's when you know it needs to be sequential because they're kind of dependent on one another. But if you can keep the 2 completely separate, convergent is the way to go. Okay? But for some of us, we actually need this build on from one phase to the other. And then we get to the interpretation. So this is an explanatory sequential design. It looks just the opposite for an exploratory sequential design. For an exploratory sequential design, you start with the qualitative. You complete the study from beginning to end. Sometimes the integration happens before you get to the analysis, or you start making decisions about the quantitative before you complete it. But essentially, you're making decisions about the quantitative study based on the qualitative study. So if one is kind of dependent on the other, go the sequential route. If you kind of can do both studies without them touching at all, go the convergent route. Okay. And we can talk more about that if that's helpful. I want to mention complex designs too, because for some of you on the line, maybe when it comes to the core designs, you've been there, done that. So maybe you don't need that kind of design. Maybe you're a little bit further along in the process. But remember, the complex designs are all still based on the core designs. So they're going to look very similar. I'm only going to talk about 3, but there are tons out there. I've read tons in the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. I think the most popular ones are the embedded, the transformative, and the multi-phase design. Now, the embedded design is simply when one research project happens within another. My favorite example is, I don't know if I'm going to date myself here, but if anyone is familiar with the NIH grant structure, you know that sometimes they used to have minority supplements or administrative supplements. A lot of times those are attached to a larger R01 study. And so I know postdocs, assistant professors who have done a smaller study within a larger R01. I think that's a great example of an embedded design. Oftentimes the topic is related to the larger study, but not the larger study. It's like, hey, this study may be on, fathers' mental health and their ability to talk to their children about depression and anxiety. That may be the larger study. But in my smaller study, I'm going to tap into stepfathers, the role of stepfathers, or the role of the brothers of those fathers, and how they may have had experiences growing up and how that could have influenced their ability to talk about mental health. I'm just going off the top of my head here, folks. But think about embedded studies as a smaller one within a larger one. If you have a PhD advisor, they may have ongoing research, and maybe your dissertation is a small part of their ongoing research. That could be another example of an embedded study. So think of one study that's smaller, that's within a larger study. The second one that I'm going to talk about in the complex design area is what's called the transformative design. Now, this looks exactly like an explanatory sequential design. I know that. But what makes it transformative is that pink dotted line going around it. And what that pink dotted line is supposed to indicate is that in every step of the research process, you are engaging the community. You are bringing them to the table. You are asking them, how do these questions look? Are we targeting the right topic area? It's really bringing them in and involving them. It's really keeping the community at the forefront of your work through every step of the process. We'll have to spend another hour talking about how I have talked with John Cresswell and Donna Mertens for years about, shouldn't this be how we do all mixed methods research? They don't always agree, but we can have another hour where we talk about that. I've had many an arm wrestling match with some of the more seasoned folks in mixed methods thinking, why is this separate? Shouldn't this be how we do all mixed methods projects? But anyway, story for another day. But that is the difference with this method compared to the others. And then finally, this is illustrating exactly what I said earlier. For many of you, your mixed methods will be over the course of your career. It'll be built into an overall program objective or something that you're doing multiple times that's being influenced and inspired by what you did last year or what you did 2 years ago. And so we like to now call this one of the more complex designs because you may do a mixed method study or you may do single method studies that inform your other studies. Okay, so I don't know if we have a whole lot of time, but I was going to pose the question, which one seems most relevant to your work? But keep this question in mind, and I want to open it up here in just a second so that we can have a conversation. But I presented 3 of the core designs and 3 examples of complex or more advanced designs. I want to just quickly show some examples of some joint data displays because to Kelly's point, if you're not mixing, you're not doing mixed methods research. And so a big part of the mixing is demonstrating to your reader how the 2 data sources come together. And so this is that teaser that I alluded to earlier. It is very important to think about how you want to integrate your data sources, but how you want to present that to people. So this is just an example of a study I did several years ago where I demonstrated my qualitative subthemes from a data set I got from a church, quantitative variables from the National Survey of American Life, and then my interpretation of that, the mixed methods interpretation of that to that far right column. So this is very wordy. This is one way to do a joint data display. I've seen some that look very much like this, right? Where they're sort of demonstrating this is how we treated the qualitative data. We went from a reflexive moment, data collection, encoding, axel coding, aggregation, reflexive moment. So they're sort of demonstrating their qualitative process. And then how does that connect to the p-values and the coefficients from our quantitative methods? And I apologize, I'm going through this quickly, but I'm happy to share the slides if you want to dig a little bit deeper into this. But just for aesthetic purposes only, I just want you to see visually how different integration joint displays can look. And this is one of my favorites because I thought, how cool is this? They created 3 joint displays for the constructs of function, symptoms, and quality of life based on scales and quotes. And I really think this is one of the more sexier ways to do a joint data display because they've color coordinated, confidence intervals with quotes from the text. And again, happy to share these references because you can look a little bit deeper into how they actually decided to not just integrate, but to make sure they're communicating to you, the reader, how they integrated. I threw this in here because I thought someone like Kelly may have that question, but this is actually a new hot off the presses integration diagram I just created. I'm digging a lot deeper into this next week during my week-long Mixed Methods Essentials workshop, but I created a diagram for folks who are really trying to figure out how do I go from quantitative to qualitative integration? And it's just these series of prompts asking what is your research goal? what is your design? And then I literally break down the statistics you can run when you're trying to integrate quantitative and qual, be they descriptive or inferential, and then actually making sure that whatever you determine answers your quantitative question. Okay, so more on that later, but quick little teaser about secondary data. Many of you may be interested in not just collecting your own data, but maybe using someone else's data source. And for a long time, we just have not had guidance about how to do that, how to accurately and robustly vet existing data sources for inclusion in our mixed methods projects. And so one of the things I wanted to make sure I did in the 2022 book was hold your hand figuratively and walk you through what are the questions you need to ask in order to vet a data source. And so the book outlines these 10 questions. It walks you through how do you integrate an existing data source in one or both of your phases for your mixed methods project. So I just wanted to share those here. Happy to talk more about that if that is your interest. And again, here are the two books. If you're interested, next week I actually told our support over in the Mixed Methods program to keep registration open just in case we have folks who are still trying to decide and need until Friday. But next week I'm actually jumping into a full week long of Mixed Methods Essentials all online through the Mixed Methods program at the University of Michigan in the Department of Family Medicine. Dr. Bitley is a part of our crew over there, but happy to say more about that if you're interested as well. But now I would love to get away from the slides and open up the conversation to see what you all are thinking and how can I help you with your thinking around mixed methods research. Of course, all the things you can follow me on and check me out. Way too much stuff about me on the internet, but that's life. But thank you for your time and attention.
Dr. Watkins, can I just ask a follow-up to the flyer that you have for next week?
Oh,
Do you
yeah,
know
sure.
what the student rate is?
I should know that, shouldn't I? Oh no, I don't know.
It's okay. I'll dig around and figure it
I
out.
should know that. Check out the website. I believe it is on the website. If you go to mixedmethods.org and
Okay.
click on workshops, it is there. I
Okay.
should know that, Kelly. I don't know that.
Joanne says it's 750.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Awesome. All right. So I have not been monitoring the chat as consistently as I should have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen only so that I can see you all and look at the chat as well. So if it's okay, Dr. Bentley and Dr. Lemons, can I open it up for questions and conversation for the
Sure.
last few minutes? Okay, great.
Hi, Dr. Watkins. Thank you for the presentation. I think I have more questions than I came here with, but I think that's okay. But first of all, I wanted to ask, how often do you do the workshop on mixed methods? So that for me, who can possibly join this time, to know when another time when you might actually do it.
Yeah. Well, I did a certificate in mixed methods research for about 12 years annually. This is a new group that I'm working with. It's not new to me, but I've moved my certificate under the mixed methods group at Michigan. And so we haven't decided how frequently I should do this yet. But if I keep hearing from people like you, Joyce, maybe we can have it at least a few times a year. But I'm not sure yet, but I'd love to get back to you once I've had a chance to see how this goes. That's okay?
Yes, thank you. Another thing that I wanted to just talk about is the reflection on the knowledge level continuum, because I have been thinking of what research method actually fits into what I'm doing. And I think I just realized that it depends on whether there are existing information, if there are no information at all, or if there is a robust field of information. Unfortunately, I can't use that word. Unfortunately for me, I do not, or maybe I do not have like a specific advisor. So I think it makes things a little bit tricky and difficult for me, knowing the kinds of research, or knowing the kind of person who can actually mentor me in this line of research. And that's because my department doesn't, I mean, you have to get to a certain level in your research before you begin to have an advisor. And I work in the global gender studies field. It's not a social work where most of my professors actually do more of theoretical research than a qual or quant and stuff like that. So that's why I have like so many thoughts and questions and maybe confusion, if I should put it that way. Knowing the kind of research that I want to go into and who is best fit to be an advisor in that sense.
Yeah. But in the meantime, just doing a thorough literature review yourself on your topic just to see where the gaps are, right? And one way to do that is to look at your topic in the actual literature right now and say, how much of it is qualitative? How much of it is quantitative? What are they saying the next steps need to be? And as you all know, that can be found in the discussion section of most papers. So just getting sort of a lay of the land, Joyce, is what I would do if I were in your shoes.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So I have more of a comment, Dr. Watkins, and I guess maybe part of it is a question, but I have been talking with Jewel quite a bit about her dissertation. And I think, at least in my opinion, the 3-paper dissertation option that we now see in many doctoral programs is very conducive to mixed methods research in terms of it being, having the 3-paper sequence and kind of thinking about it as a mixed methods project. Could you provide an example of what that might look like for our doctoral students?
Yeah, sure. I've seen a few different examples, Dr. Lemons. I've seen, I have a doctoral student right now who is doing, for her dissertation, a qualitative study, a quantitative study, and a mixed method study. And that's pretty common, the 3 papers being those studies. I haven't seen anyone yet do mixed methods for all 3, but I could see that depending on the topics and the data sources. Like they're just sort of picking main topics from their data collection and just presenting qual and quant, qual and quant, qual and quant, right? And how they want to sequence that is completely up to them if they want to do it at all. But for the most part, I'm thinking my last probably 4 or 5 doctoral students, I saw a qualitative paper, a quant paper, and a mixed methods paper.
Okay. And then what about the other way around, quant, qual, and mixed methods? That's also.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm talking about like those first 2 can be ordered however.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And one more question that I often get as well, and I always refer students to your book on secondary data and the use of it in mixed methods research. But can you say a little bit more about what that might look like? Because sometimes it's kind of hard for people to wrap their brain around, normally you gather the data, or people, when they talk about mixed methods research, they think about it in terms of gathering all of the data from the same individuals.
Yeah.
And so they, can't quite wrap their mind around how using secondary data might work or how that might look. And so can you say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. And it is a difficult concept to wrap one's head around, right? It's like, how can I use this data for my work when I'm not the one who collected the data? It just doesn't make sense in practical terms, right? But what it really involves, Dr. Lemons, is it involves a deep interrogation of existing data sources.
Yeah.
It involves critically looking at existing data, pulling back the curtain. Who were the original researchers? What theories guided their work? Who did they collect data from? What was attrition like? What was study retention like? And really figuring out, based on what they have provided, does that help answer my research question or a version of my research question? And so what I often tell people, when I wrote about in the book, it's not always an apples to apples comparison. And one example that I can provide is I've often seen people do studies where they say, well, I'm interested in mental health and adolescents, or adolescent boys or adolescent girls, and I say, okay, what aspects of mental health? But I'm really, really interested in schizophrenia. I'm interested in depression, and they may have access to a data set that covers anxiety or covers some other mental health disorder. And my question is, okay, so then do you chuck that data set out, or do you say, this helps inform a part of my research question? Maybe not depression specifically, but what about anxiety? Can I learn from this data source? Or maybe I can use it as one of my two data sources that could help inform a second phase that I collect that maybe focuses on depression. And so sometimes it's a bit of an iterative process. It's more so not just saying this is great secondary data or it's not, is does this help inform what I'm trying to learn directly or even indirectly? And that's the part that I think is harder for people to wrap their heads around, because rarely have I seen an apples to apples match. I am interested in this topic with these variables and this concept, and a data set exists out there that is perfect. Oftentimes, it's a little bit more of an iterative process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a question, but it's not yet formulated. But I know you're about to leave us, so I'm just gonna try and
Go for
make
it.
it cohesive. One, I just passed my qualifying exams, and you're cited all through there. So thank you very
Hey,
much for that.
thanks for the shout
So
out.
yes, so I am a doc student, and I want to do a 3-paper dissertation. So thank you, Dr. Lemons, for sharing that. So my qualifying exam, I did a scope and review. And so I'm looking at mental health in Black families, specifically looking at 3 generations. So my hope is that my first qualifying exam, which is a scoping review, can serve as paper 1. And then I can do a quant and qual study, specifically looking at the future family data and looking at, because they surveyed grandparents, and then doing qualitative interviews. I haven't quite figured out if that means I'm looking at having all 3 generations in one room or trying to do it individually, right?
Yeah.
So my question becomes, when you're talking about the sequential or convergent designs, is that in my mind, technically these could be standalone in the sense of like, I'm specifically looking at depression, and how it is discussed, coped with, but really how it's kind of like transmitted.
Okay.
So my question is like, I feel like I can come up with a rationale why it could be treated as 2 separate things, why the quad can come first and can be corroborated by the quad and vice versa. So how do I kind of narrow it down and say this is what it should be or what I'm going with?
That was a beautiful question, Heather. You did not give yourself the credit you deserve. That was a great question. And I have an answer for you. Make the decision and justify. This is something that a lot of people run into. They say, I don't know which one is right. Right is kind of relative, right? If you can justify why the 2 methods need to remain separate, if you will, and why you need to complete each method from beginning to end and then integrate at the bottom or at the end of the study, that is a great reason to do convergent. If you're seeing a lot of the decisions you're making about one method truly being influenced about what you know about the other method, I can see that being a bit more sequential. And so there is no wrong answer here. You have to make the decision. I think once you make the decision, you'll be able to justify it perfectly.
Thank you. That was
Yeah.
extremely helpful.
Yeah, of course. And by the way, I don't know if people have to go, but I had my assistant block me out till 1:30 just in case. So last call for wine, ladies. Last call for wine.
Hi,
I
Dr.
have a
Watkins.
question. Sorry, August.
Oh, no, Vanity, you can go. And then I think Dr. Jenkins had a question after you.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Yeah, no, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say thank you. This was really helpful. Especially because for like for the study that I'm doing, a lot of people do quantitative work in it. And so I was thinking that for my dissertation I would do a mixed methods, but I feel like I just don't know enough. I've taken a class. I'm kind of like broadly into whatever method like works best. So
Yeah.
qualitative, I've taken qual class, quant class, mixed methods class, and I feel like I'm still like floating in the air when it comes to the information. Like I still have a hard time to like grasping it. So I felt
Yeah.
like this was really, really helpful. And while I'm going to continue to do a qualitative study, for my dissertation, I keep thinking about like how interesting it would be to do a mixed method study. I just don't know where to start. And so this
Yeah.
was like really, really helpful in helping me to like kind of grasp the information of what mixed methods is and like for my study, why I'm so drawn to it.
Yeah. Thank you, Vanity. I appreciate that.
Vanity, to your comment though, I my dissertation was mixed methods, which is part of the reason why I love it so much. I've taken Dr. Watkins' training as well and loved it. And so I'm happy to further explore things with you as well. But I think part of the reason why I am so drawn to mixed methods research is because, as Dr. Watkins mentioned, it gives you a fuller picture and a fuller understanding of your subject matter. For me, I knew that I wanted to do a quantitative study, but I also knew that I wanted to have a qualitative piece because of the nature of the population that I was studying, which is non-resident African American fathers. And I felt like I needed a more complete picture. I felt like I wanted to hear their stories, their narratives. I felt like my work wouldn't be complete unless I had that additional qualitative piece that would help me to understand their narrative, because so often their voices are not heard or considered in the research. So I think that's something to think about also in terms of your population and the extent to which their voices are being heard in the work.
Yeah.
Dr. Watkins, are you still offering the certification program, or are you going to offer that in the future?
Yeah, so I have evolved. So the certificate is now the Mixed Methods Essential Workshop. Yeah, I decided to move it out from continuing education into this other space. Yeah. But it's like under new management. It's like new, and I re-recorded all the videos and the lectures, so it's a lot fresher, new, energizing material. So yeah, I have grown after 12 years of sort of teaching a similar style and format under the School of Social Work. I decided to come out with something a little bit new. Yeah.
When you think about qualitative research, we learned a lot about like CBPR.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, after you all did your dissertation, this goes out to all the doctors on the call. Um, did you, did you, I guess, like reconnect with the participants that you did the qualitative interviews with to kind of see how, um, because I'm thinking about disseminating, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
larger ideas around that and how sometimes, and I'm also coming from a direct service lens where folks feel very abandoned if you engage with them for like research purposes and
Yeah.
then like leave.
Yeah.
So I know you are well in your field, but was that a thought during your dissertation? Like, I'm gonna seek out these qualitative interviews, probably establish some type of rapport.
Mm-hmm.
How can I show them uh, the impact of their assistance or uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm curious to hear what other people think, but I've done this in a few different ways. So when I was at the dissertation stage, what I did was I assembled my very own little expert advisory board that's made up of my participants. And I would frequently go back to them, maybe monthly or quarterly, just to present what I was working on, get their advice. And while I found that incredibly helpful for me, over the years, I learned that it was helpful for them too. Like they felt like they were a part of the work, a part of the science, a part of the advancement. And so they really appreciated that. Now that I'm a faculty member, that looks a little bit different in that now with the community, I actually frequently meet with executive directors of nonprofits or directors of centers or programs who work with Black men, and no grant money involved. We just have a coffee and we talk. And that connection outside of the money makes them feel like, okay, this is not a helicopter researcher. Dr. Watkins is not somebody who's just dropping in, getting our information and leaving. Like, she's around even when we don't have $1 million grant, even when she's not benefiting directly. And I tell people to do that all the time because sometimes, I mean, these community folks, like they know, they know if you care or not. They know if you're exploiting them. And so I just work really, really hard. When opportunities come my way, I send them opportunities, they send me opportunities. So we have a relationship. Now, when it comes to the participants, I am the queen of the advisory board. I will put together an advisory board of participants and check in with them, send them opportunities, talk about perks, talk about funding if they're interested. And so I tend to do my connections in that way. But you're right, Heather, it has looked different compared to the dissertation stage versus now. But I'm curious to see what others have done to maintain those connections.
Again, my mind is blown. Didn't know you could do like that's so smart to do an advisory board. I'm just thinking about like uh organizations that I know that are doing the work, and so getting their perspective as I'm crafting my dissertation and doing my study, that would be really smart and really wise. So thank you for the I was taking notes, just
So
sitting here in awe.
So Kelly, I'll tell you that one of my doctoral students right now is doing that. During her dissertation proposal defense, she came to us as the committee and said, what do you think about these questions? What do you think about this? And we unanimously said, we think you should assemble a committee, like a committee of community members who are ongoingly advising your work. Like I mean, we're the researchers, but they know their community better than we do, right? So I strongly advise that. So that's now built into her IRB. It's built into her research project for her dissertation.
And I also wanted to add, don't discount the idea of actually presenting with your participants at
Yes.
conferences and things of that nature, once you gather your findings. And, the true nature of community-based participatory research is that they be involved from the start, your participants. However, that's sort of toward the end of the process where you're thinking about how you might present the results along with um, your participants as well. So allowing them to have a voice in how how the narrative is presented to the community.
Dr. Watkins, I had a question for you if you
Yeah.
still have time. And thank you again for a really simplistic, like, well, not simplistic, but like accessible presentation. That's also very informative. I'm working on a study right now that will be mixed methods, following that sequential design, starting with quantitative and then going into the qualitative analysis. And the goal is for it to be pilot data. I'm just starting, my career, and I want to use this to sort of establish and explain some phenomenon and continue to branch on, in this area throughout my career. But I'm interested in your ideas where you were talking about the integration of the method, of like the results and the findings from both methods, and especially when it comes to publications, because as you have a sequential design, right, you still have to be productive even when one phase has maybe completed the collection and is on to analysis, whereas the second phase is still like in progress. So
Yeah.
how do you think about the integration, in a linear fashion as we're experiencing time, but also like holistically as well?
Yeah. It's tricky. And I would argue, Dr. Jenkins, that it's probably more of an art than a science. And I feel like some people come to mixed methods who are unfamiliar with how integration works, looking for a science. And I actually think it's more of an art because I think there is a iterative process of trying to figure out, okay, what was my original research question? What did I learn to answer that research question from both the qualitative and the quantitative methods? And then how can I demonstrate to my reader that I really needed both to answer the question, right? So what did I learn qualitatively that is further informed quantitatively, for example, right? Like what about the generalizability of my quantitative findings helps now provide a better understanding of the topic? And in what ways and how did my qualitative data provide the stories behind the numbers or the voices behind the numbers, if you will? And so I think it's a bit of a dance between how are you determining the results from both methods almost sort of separately versus together. And that's where you hear the term meta inferences a lot in the literature. It's sort of breaking it down to what did you learn individually? And then now together, what do we know more about your study or about the topic that we would not have known from one method alone? So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think I'm getting there, but feel free to probe if I'm not directly answering what it is you're trying to learn.
No, I think you are, and I think that's very helpful to hear. Like, there's a balance and a tension that has to be negotiated, and keeping in mind like why this, overarching design is being utilized in the first place, and not sort of chopping and dicing it up appropriately. I think I'm interested in hearing more, like from an ethical perspective. What are your thoughts on, publishing some results that you might get from the quantitative design as you are still collecting qualitative data? And then further on, also having papers later on where you're integrating both.
Yeah.
Or is that doing a disservice to, the question or the study goal?
It is not. It is not. A lot of us who have these programs of research that span multiple years, that is exactly what we do. And we sort of couch it as the evolution of our project, right? We are learning things along the way. It is our responsibility to disseminate what we learn, but to also frame every bite-sized chunk of what we disseminate as a study in and of itself. At this stage, we don't want to wait any longer. We want to get these quantitative results out there. But even after they're published, we want to learn from those too. So we're going to build a qualitative phase. But there is nothing ethically wrong with doing that. Again, it's all about the evolution of science. And I'm reminded of my cyclical diagram at the very beginning of my presentation where I talked about we start with questions and we end with questions. But no one is expecting you to wait until it's all done before you disseminate. You definitely should be disseminating along the way.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay. You're welcome.
Dr. Watkins, I just wanted to mention one thing with regard to sequential designs, just as a point of caution. And this is more specific to my population, but could still be true for others as well in terms of non-resident African-American fathers. So in my dissertation, I conducted an explanatory sequential design, which started with quantitative research. And it took me 6 months. I was in the field 6 months gathering my quantitative data from my surveys. I surveyed 110 fathers, which required, going to Heather's point, building trust and rapport, literally sitting in on dinners with the fathers and having dinner with them and talking with them, building trust, and things of that nature. Some days I would have 5 fathers, some days I would only have 1. And so it took me quite some time. And so once I gathered all of my quantitative data and I analyzed it, that was the basis for developing my interview protocol for the qualitative phase. However, many of the fathers that I had identified that I wanted to interview were no longer available or around by the time I got to the point of being ready to do my interviews. I had selected certain individuals purposively because they had certain experiences, certain accounts that I was interested in learning more about. also on the basis of their demographics. So wanting to have a good mix of fathers demographically in terms of socioeconomic status, employment status, co-parenting relationship, all of the various demographic factors that I learned were important for the research on non-resident African American fathers. So I had picked out certain individuals that I wanted to interview, but by the time I got to that phase, I couldn't find them. And so it went from being a purposive sample to being a sample of convenience, because it was one in which it was who was available to me at the time. And so I say that to say, you can go in with the best of intentions, but sometimes things can change, and so going back to what Heather mentioned in terms of building that rapport, that's not only something that comes at the end, but that's something that we have to do along the way as well. And knowing our population, knowing what to expect when we get in the field. So if I were able to do it all over again, I would have remained in contact with those individuals, even as I was collecting my quantitative data and crunching those numbers and producing my results from that phase. I would have remained in contact with them had I known then what I know now.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that story too, because this is one of the probably top 3 questions I get from people is, do I have to use the same sample for my qualitative and quantitative phase? And my answer to that is it depends, right? Like I can see circumstances for which you will absolutely need to try to maintain the same sample for both. And the example that comes to my mind is intervention research, right? If you're testing an intervention, I can see why, if you're collecting both qualitative and quantitative data with regard to the intervention, you want people who have participated in the intervention, right? Like that makes sense to me. And I can also see a situation where you're trying to study a phenomenon of interest. You're trying to study a concept, an idea, an experience. And maybe it's okay to have different people as long as they share the same characteristics or share the same experience or share something, right, that can actually help inform the work. And so this is another example where I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. I think it will depend on your circumstances. And frankly, what Dr. Lemons has demonstrated to us is life happening, right? Research is never perfect. It's never what you read in the textbook. It's always different from that. And so the pivot that you made, I think, was brilliant. Like you just have to do what you have to do to get the data collected. And so your ability to pivot is really a survival technique in this kind of work. If things don't happen exactly how you've laid out, you have to keep going. You can't just stop. And I've had people call me on the phone before and say, I was planning to do a mixed methods research project, but I can't track down anyone for the follow-up qualitative interview, so now I'm just going to stop. And I said, well, why would you stop? Well, I really need these people. Let's talk, let's strategize. Like, we don't just stop, right? We try to figure out how can we get our questions answered in other creative ways, which goes back to my comment for Dr. Jenkins. Sometimes it can be more of an art than a science. So give yourself permission to be creative as you're thinking about these methods and how it can help you answer your questions. I guess we have all finished our glasses of wine here in my living room. So everyone's eating all the snacks. Are we starting to wind down here?
I actually have another question,
Yeah, sure.
or just a thought, because we use this term mixing so much, and it's kind of hard to imagine what that looks like in terms of actually integrating the data at whatever phase, depending on whether you're doing concurrent, sequential, whatever your mixed methodology might be. What exactly does the mixing entail? What does that look like? Let's just say in a sequential design. At where do we mix, and what does that mixing look like?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a high level answer just in the interest of time. But I see the actual process of mixing as a constant double dutch in your brain, where you are consistently thinking about the implications of your qualitative method, and you're also sequentially thinking about the implications of your qualitative method. So it's almost like, I think in my mixed methods workshop I'm doing next week, and for the last 12 years, I've always talked about mixed methods being double dutch. It is having to account for each rope in due time. At some point, you have to jump over one and you have to jump over the other. So you have to give each rope its appropriate attention. So in my mind, mixed methods is that. It is, how are you mixing? It's thinking about the quantitative phase and what decisions are you making around data collection, data analysis. What was the output? What's the coefficients? What's the statistical results? And then saying, based on what I see in the statistics, now let me look at the qualitative. Right? What have I learned from the qualitative? What are my codes? What are my themes? What are the takeaway points? What topic am I focused on? And figuring out in what ways does the qualitative work help me better understand the quant? And in what ways does the quant help me better understand the qual? And so people, you're right, use mixing all the time. But when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, to the nitty gritty of it, what is the output? And how does the output come together? But it goes further than that. What are the data collection methods? How do they come together? What's the theory that we're considering? How does that come together? And so I always tell people, if you're doing a mixed methods project for the first time, if you mix one time, I'm happy. But when you get a little bit further in your career, I can see people mixing at the design stage, at the data collection stage, at the data analysis stage, not just at the interpretation stage. And so mixing can look different for different people, but essentially it's when and in what ways do aspects from both methods come together, even ever so briefly. I'm thinking about this as I'm making decisions about this. I shouldn't do this here because I'm doing it over here. So and that's why I use the double dutch metaphor, because if you stop jumping over one rope, you will unsuccessfully be double dutching, right? You get smacked in the head with the rope. So it's constantly thinking about each rope when it comes at you, right? So that you can successfully and smoothly double dutch. So I hope that's helpful.
No, yeah, it was.
Got a little
Thank
carried
you.
away on the double dutch there. Clearly, I need some exercise in my life, but
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah.
Just really quickly, Dr. Watkins, I guess following up on that question, are there particular papers or reports or that you like to recommend in terms of, if you're sort of new to writing up a mixed methods paper, do you have sort of model papers you recommend that we read to look at in terms of demonstrating like what this integration looks like if done successfully?
Yes, I may have to send them to you later because in my 2015 book, I cover 3 exemplar studies, and they're a little dated, but I just don't have the citations at my hand. But I'm looking at my bookshelves because I know the book is there. But yeah, in the final few chapters of that 2015 book, I actually dissect 3 what I consider exemplar studies. And I think if you're new to mixed methods, they are so straightforward and so clear that you don't have to be proficient in mixing and embedded design. You don't have to know any of that. I think these studies are really, really crystal clear. And I'm happy to follow up and send those 3 studies. But if anybody has the 2015 book, just flip to the back. Actually, each study has its own little section where I dissect it and talk about why it's an exemplar study.
Oh, great. That's great to know. Thank you.
I think you all are waiting for me to speak, but I'm waiting for you all to speak. So that's why I was just
Any more questions for Dr. Watkins?
They're taking it all in. They're just
Yeah.
taking it all in. This is why. So, Dr. Lemons, you've taken my certificate program before, and I know the day I would leave the Canvas course room open and access to all the videos and readings open for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
This new program that I'm doing next week, I'm leaving all the materials open for a month afterwards, just recognizing that people need time to digest. And so, yeah, I have changed that, and that, yeah, it's a lot when it's just
It is.
that you.
Yeah.
So I made the decision. I was like, maybe a month or two I'm going to do for next week when people enter into that workshop. So hopefully folks appreciate the extra time to watch videos and rewatch them and
Oh, yeah.
really absorb what I'm covering.
Definitely. And we'll be sharing this video with everybody. You all have the slides, but we'll put them up in the Google Drive as well so that you'll have access to them later.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll make all of this available to everyone.
Yeah. And I invite you all to reach out. I know your names now. I'm looking at your names here in the Zoom room. So feel free to reach out if you have follow-up questions.
Thank you so much. This was really wonderful.
Yes, thank you. And big shout out to Dr. Lemons and Dr. Bentley for inviting me to do this. I really appreciate the invitation, and this has been a blast. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Extremely helpful. And I am going to reach out. So.
Yay!
Yeah, I'm definitely, I don't have questions because it takes me a while to think through like what are my questions, but I will be emailing you.
Okay, awesome. Okay, Kelly, Holly, Heather, Joe. Okay, I'm memorizing your names. Okay, got it. All right, Jewel Wakefield. Okay, got it. All right, awesome.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.